I realized recently that I have an example of just about every generation of NuTone Central Vac from when they were introduced all the way through what is currently being sold by NuTone. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to run through a quick little overview of the evolution of the product and some of the good points and bad points about it. Starting from the earliest machines, well, NuTone began in the 1930s with the introduction of the first musical door chime. They provided an alternative to the old school door buzzer, and that proved a very popular product. They established a nationwide network of electrical supply house distributors for their product, and then eventually introduced more kind of complementary home convenience products. NuTone was always big into bathroom ventilation, kitchen ventilation, intercom systems, all kinds of stuff. They even made like it was called a food center in the 1960s, 70s, like basically a built-in blender that went in your countertop. And they jumped on the bandwagon of the rebirth of the residential central vac system in the 1960s. So this would be an example from about 1970 of an early NuTone system. They started out with just one model, and this is a Model 350. It's got a 7.2-inch motor in it, like just about every other manufacturer used. That motor was used in bagless systems, bagged systems, systems with a cloth filter, vacuum aid, VacuFlow, Beam, Filtax. Everybody used this motor, and it was a workhorse. So this Model 350 always had a disposable bag. This bag is part number 391. It's just a big, huge version of like an upright vacuum bag. It's got a hole here that you stick onto a spout right here inside the machine. The spout inside here, there's an elbow that faces downward, and that's where you put the bag on. And that was that. Just reliable, simple. Initially, you would have gotten a set of hose and attachments that looked like this. Attachments from Eureka, including a rug tool, a bare floor brush, a crevice tool, a dusting brush, and upholstery tool. Two chrome wands, and an elbow for your floor attachments. All very nice quality. A 1.25 inch wire reinforced hose. This is pretty nice because it actually swivels at both ends, and this has the old school design with the ferrules instead of the cuffs. NuTone systems were always installed with standard 2-inch thin wall PVC vacuum tubing, and they used a standard electrical control system, which is a low voltage relay inside the main unit, always self-contained, not in a separate relay box, and two contacts in the neck of the inlet valve, which are bridged by the hose end. So that is standard even today. You can take a system with 50-year-old NuTone piping and inlets and adapt a modern machine. So that's kind of nice. They at some point realized that a little more power would be better, so they introduced a Model 353, which would have been sort of a metallic red color, and they had a utility valve on that model that would actually turn on when you opened it. So kind of nice. At some point also they realized that this didn't really clean plush and shag carpet very well. So within a few years you could get a power brush, also made by Eureka. This is a later version. The earliest ones would have had a wood grain top, sticker, decal, and no headlight. And originally you got just a long cord that you could have trailing along separately, or you could strap it to the hose like we've done here. And so you could plug this into your power head, into the wand. You could connect your cords up there, and at the wall then you would plug your vacuum hose in, boom, and you would find a nearby electrical outlet to plug your cord in. And that did the job. Then you could clean carpets. Kind of cumbersome, especially by today's standards. You couldn't blame somebody for moving into their retro time capsule house and seeing this and saying, ugh, and not even wanting to mess with it. But I'll get to that. Upgrades are available and very worthwhile to these older setups. They were actually pretty quick to introduce an electrified hose too, because this is not great. So they gave you the option to have a hose where you plug the hose into the wall. You still plugged a cord in, but that cord was only at the end, and the wiring traveled through the spirals of the hose then, so that at the handle end you didn't have any exposed wires, but you did have a little place to plug in your power head cord right there, those two holes. And that remains a fairly kind of industry standard way to do things today. NuTone would have updated their units sometime into the mid to late 80s, and they looked more like this one. They kept the utility inlet, but they added a manual switch in place of the switch that turned on when you opened the inlet. And they went away from the nice shrouded motor cooling vent and gave the units a flat top. And even though it does have a sticker that says do not block motor cooling air vents, they put it on the top of the unit where you wouldn't see it. And what a handy place to keep your disposable spare bags. That would then block off the motor cooling air and decrease the life of your motor. So don't put the bags on top of your vacuum. NuTone's being sold through electrical supply houses. Many of them were not being put in by vacuum contractors that were servicing and installing central vacs day in, day out, like yours truly, for example. And so some of the least quality installs that we've seen happen to be with NuTone equipment. And I try not to let that color my view of the product itself, but it's I mean, one of my favorite brands is MD, and if all the MDs I ever saw were installed terribly, I might not think very much of MD either. So you can have a great central vac with a terrible installation, and you can also have let's call it a builder grade central vac that if it's installed really well, then it'll work really well. And one of the things that NuTone as a company could have done better, though, was they loved these medium sweep 90s and these short radius T fittings. And this is just going to be terribly restrictive to airflow and prone to clogging. And that's even if you install it properly. And of course, because these are installed by people that might be doing a vacuum today and an intercom tomorrow and a bathroom exhaust fan next week, you get a lot of like, hey, just glue it together, air don't care, right? And dropout T's and all kinds of stuff. So be mindful of that if you're examining a NuTone installation. This unit is a later 1990s version of a dual motor machine. So in the late 1980s, a lot of brands were offering dual motor. There were some larger house installations being done. And so NuTone first came out with, it was a dual motor in parallel machine called the CV400. So it was short like this, but wider body. And it had two motors in parallel, which, as you may know, increases the CFM that the system can develop, but not any additional water lift. And with those being small 5.7-inch motors, they didn't have all that much water lift to begin with. And then if you take and put it on a system with medium sweep 90s and an 1.25-inch wire reinforced hose, well, at the end of the hose then, your performance is going to be less than one of the single motor systems had. And that was just not good. So NuTone figured that out fairly quickly, and they went to a dual motor in series system. Now when you put two motors in series with one pulling off the exhaust of the other, that increases your maximum vacuum pressure that the system can generate. Doesn't do anything for your airflow, but it can help keep the airflow stronger through the restrictions of the system, most notably the hose. So the two motors in series worked a lot better for a NuTone system, and that was their model CV450, either in red or like this one in white. Very common machine, kind of a workhorse, and we can still get these motors. In fact, we can still get all these motors over here, and the control, the relay board. These units did have a nasty habit of failing in the on position, so that relay would the contacts would weld themselves together and the unit would continue to run and run and run until you realized, what's that noise, and you went down and unplugged it. So that means you need a relay board. So that's that. When we're getting into the 90s, we're getting into a little bit different tools. Some of the systems came with this nice little box. Looks like a gun case or something. But in here would have been a tool set including 2 chrome wands, and we have an upholstery tool, a slide off brush for that, a crevice tool, a dusting brush. You know, all the things that look brand new and unused because nobody knows what they're for and nobody bothers to use them. Well, you should use them. And not my favorite kind of attachment here. This is a combination floor and rug tool. Non-powered, so we don't have any rotating brush action here. We just have one little pedal that you hit to make the brush come out, and this is to vacuum your hard floors. And the other pedal makes the brush go back in, and that was to vacuum your rugs. Well, I never thought this tool did a terribly good job on floors or rugs, and it was way too easy to have it on the wrong setting and scrape up your floors, as this one obviously has been doing over its life. So, not my favorite. I much prefer a floor brush with bristles, like a more modern version of that. So the only thing touching your floor is brush. And nowadays we can get a natural bristle brush that doesn't get all matted and nasty like a nylon bristle brush, but that's another story. In the 1990s, you could either get a Eureka-made power brush, which is this one, labeled as NuTone, but this is from Eureka's, like, if you bought a Eureka canister vacuum, well, in the 80s it would have come with that, and in the 90s it would have come with that. Well, NuTone just bought the tool from Eureka. NuTone only made the canister and the inlets, and I guess they made the hose hanger and the little caddy thing, but the attachments, the hoses, they bought from vendors that made those things for them. This power brush is a very popular one from the 1990s and 2000s, and it is most commonly recognized as the Kenmore / Centec / Panasonic power brush. Nice performer. This one gave you a lifetime, like a geared belt. I wouldn't call it a lifetime belt because they do still break, but they don't stretch. That's one thing about like this one and this one over here. They work great for the first few times you use them, and then that rubber flat belt starts to slip a little bit and stretch a little bit, and now your performance, your carpet cleaning ability is sort of on this long downward trajectory until you say, oh, something's wrong with the vacuum, or you smell burning rubber or whatever. And yeah, it's this thing that's making noise, but it's doing a third the job of what it would do with a brand new belt. So the gear belt eliminated that problem, which was good. We started to see them adopting some higher performance hose technology. This is still the inefficient wire reinforced material, but at least it's 1 3/8 inch ID instead of 1 1/4 like the old ones. This one had a switch in the handle. You could turn the vacuum system off and on, and that meant that at the end you had a split in the metal. These are actually 2 separate contacts that would hit the contacts in the wall plate. And so your newer style, like after the mid to late 80s, looked just like this, but it had a little notch in the middle that this would then be aligned with. Oh, kind of like, see that? So you would have these on your walls, but in white or ivory. Or brown. They made brown too. So anyway, that's an 1 3/8, what they call a high performance low voltage hose. This is a very common hose, and this is a dual voltage hose, so you have not only the double contact design at the end to switch the system off and on, you also had 110 volt connection and a 3-position switch. So this would be a full control hose that would control your main power unit as well as your power brush by selecting 1 or 2. Problem with this hose is it's heavy. It is very restrictive to the airflow, and it is hell on your corners. So even with a fabric hose cover, this hose is still going to wear the paint off. Any of these hoses, in fact, are a prime candidate for replacement with a newer style. We'll get into that. Starting into the late 90s, early 2000s, NuTone began to offer your more efficient modern hose materials, and these are called crush-proof hoses. A little bit of a misnomer because they are actually crushable, but they don't stay crushed, so the name is crush-proof. Not only are these more lightweight, more durable, they swivel at the handles, but to me the most important thing is how much less restrictive the inner walls are, and so these will make your system work better than any of these. You can take a really powerful central vac unit and put an inefficient hose with it and kill off all that cleaning power that the machine is generating. So if you have a hose where the handle looks like this, in the case of a low voltage hose, or a handle like this in the case of a dual voltage hose, and you see that little receptacle there, then you are in good shape. And these hoses are made by Plastiflex, which in my opinion is the best central vac hose maker in the industry. So this to me, because I got in this business in like the mid 2000s, this to me was like your standard everyday NuTone system. And I mean, I never thought it was the best, but it would work. It would just do its job. Builder grade stuff is just supposed to work. Nothing fancy, just get the job done. Well, when NuTone switched to this machine called the VX series and abandoned the metal design, that took a turn. The quality went from a machine that you could get, 20 years out of to a machine that maybe only was good for half that. The engineering team that designed this had some nice ideas. They made the machine kind of flatter. It was an oval. It hugged the wall. They did have a dual motor version of this in addition to the single motor version with a high performance motor. They did actually have a bag full system that was based on differential pressure instead of just a timer like everybody else's bag full lights, or idiot lights is what, you've heard that. But the motors were troublesome. Lots of problems with the thermal protectors being too sensitive in these motors. I thought that the bag system was not well executed. It's tough. Like, all you're trying to do is get this bag collar onto this spout, but having to manipulate the bag onto this door and having to go not only through this door on the front but also through the bin on the bottom to get the bag out and put a new one in was just not like, you guys had a working system here. Why did you change it? So anyway, the VX series are not my favorite. But then, in the last, I would say, 5 years, the NuTone Central Vacs have been these. They went from the VX to the Pure Power. And they went back to metal. They went back to a simpler bag system. They gave these machines a teeny weeny little motor. And that little tiny motor actually produces some good specs, some good suction measurements, but that's because it's running so super fast, and you can hear it in the shrillness of this unit. And so this isn't going to be a really long-lasting motor, even in the best case scenario, which is clean air going through it, well ventilated, blah, blah, blah. Well, this unit is advertised as a hybrid unit, meaning you can use it with a disposable bag or without a disposable bag. And if you're using it without a disposable bag, doing what's supposed to be an acceptable thing, well, that's going to let dirt through that filter up into the motor, and dirt going through this motor, that fine dust, just quickly wreaks havoc on the machine. And I have seen these have a rather disappointingly short lifespan. So I don't know. It's the story of so many things in so many industries. You take a brand that was a good solid brand built over decades and you just erode it. So kind of unfortunate, but what are you going to do? In any case, if you have any of these machines in your home, even one that's decades old, that can be fixed, it can be modernized, it can be upgraded, and it can be a very, very helpful, useful thing to have in your home that may, even at its age, have a lot of life left in it. And we are here to help you with that. We can get you parts for these systems, get you hoses and tools that will fit in your old wall inlets, and get you to start using that system again, because even an old central vac can easily outperform a new high-end portable. This is Owen. Thanks for watching, and as always, happy vacuuming.